A little bit of background on this. There are, when we did this, this took 3 years, and this piece of research was done with political party people. So it's not the general public. It was people who are actually in political parties across the US. We went to the Republican Party, we went to the Libertarian Party, we went to the Greens, we went to the Democrats, and we had roughly just under 2,500 party people respond. So it was just really a nice sampling of politics in America. And we used the Spiral Dynamics Discover, and we used probably 3 or 4 other validated political tools. One was the libertarians tool. The other was another political values survey. Another one was just the kind of usual thing that they use in politics. So when the results came back, we literally ended up with thousands of pages of data and results. So what I've done is I've pulled out a few that are maybe a little bit more meaningful, and I pulled out a few that might show us a few things that are interesting based on some of what we covered during Spiral Dynamics Live, just to draw that distinction between contents and containers, and to show you how it's not as clean and clear cut as we think it is. And also wanted to cover some of the things that you guys were really interested and concerned about. So, and this is a very big day. For those of you who are not in the US, you can imagine that the difference that we're going to see based on what unravels and unrolls from today and probably over the next week or so really may change not only the course of this country, but some of the things that are happening in the world. So it's a very serious, serious thing. And there are a lot of people right now who are in fear, they're in angst, they're frustrated, they're concerned about the future, they're angry, they're in pain. There are a lot of things going on simultaneously for people right across this country and across the world. And there's a lot of frustration in terms of, you know, this is not the life I signed up for. This is not the world that I wanted to live in. We could do so much better. And everybody's got a different way of seeing what better is. So we're gonna look at these colors. And as you know, I don't like doing colors, but I want you to consider what the spectrum of what these colors actually means. So often people are trying to oversimplify it. So it's about each color represents a worldview. Each color organizationally represents a way of interacting both at the individual level, at the team level, and as a group, right? So we've got caricatures in our minds around, well, that's what Republicans do. That's what Democrats do. That's what Greens are like, right? So we've got these sort of simplistic caricatures of humans. And it helps to contextualize some of that, but it goes far beyond it. These colors also go to the underlying, unseen, hidden, even to the individual sometimes, drivers of behavior and drivers of doing and thinking and processing. So it goes to the core motivation. These also go to the leadership style and approach that we're seeing from different leaders. And whoever someone chooses as a leader, my belief is they are choosing, and whether that choice is conscious or unconscious, there is a choice making, and that people will be attracted to and stick with and be repelled by leaders based on what their underlying psychosocial systems. That these are also about how people engage, how they engage with one another, how they engage with themselves, how they engage with content and material and ideas and constructs and beliefs, and how they engage with values and so on. And these are the shapers and the building blocks of cultural norms. And each party has its own norms. Every family has their own cultural norms. Different areas in a city have their cultural norms, and these are shapers of those cultural norms. And this lies behind our choice making. Which leaders do we choose? Which ideological approaches do we choose? What do we choose in terms of our best abilities for our future and for who it is we want to become? And this is also core to our relating to one another, relating to ourselves, core to our relationships. And so Patricia said what she'd like to see from this is a summary of the main findings and how they relate to the present time in the US and the world. And we've got data from right around the world. So I might be able to speak to that, but put the questions in so I make sure that we do speak to that. Then let me just do one quick. Okay, something happened there. All right. And then Patricia said, I don't want to get caught in those never-ending political discussions. The political people love the never-ending political discussions. So hang out until the end, and I'm going to share something with you that might have you seeing it a little bit differently. So stay tuned. And Ron says he wants to see spiral perspectives on past, present, future. Where are we going and why are we in this handbasket? And I love that one. So Ron will tackle some of that. And we also saw, this theme of what's happening with the divisiveness, right? And Ron's thinking, whatever the outcome is, there's going to be more divisiveness. And we can talk a little bit about why that's happening. And Shirley said, so I am recording, so I remembered to do it. Hopefully it'll do it properly. So Shirley, if you're watching, doing this for you. So if challenges are what help or cause an individual to move up the levels of development, and it's not all challenges, right? So it's certain categories of challenges stay within a system, and then there are new and different challenges that emerge as a result of, and it's more than just challenges, but as a result of solving those problems of existence. So it's challenges are part of that package. And then she says that much of the divide and the chaos we're seeing could be said that it's a symptom of a larger portion of the population hitting the ceiling of tier 1. So hang tight. I think we need to think about it a little bit differently. So she wants to hear how, what the data says and what we can do as coaches, leaders, guides to practically support a leap into tier 2. So I'm not an ascriber of that. And just go back to that portion, Shirley, in the Spiral Dynamics Live, and you'll see how that's unpacked. But Claire Graves said this, and I believe this is absolutely what we need to do, is if we are leaders, we need to either support people in moving to what is next for them or to get out of the way. And we may think we're doing that. And this material, this approach really helps us get a grasp and a handle on that a lot better. Wheaton, politics, very interested in learning more about spiral dynamics and politics and our current polarization, especially as it relates to social and racial equality. And those have been really some of the big battles over the last, decades, really, over like centuries. But it's really become part of, and I think a good thing, part of the common popular dialogue. And he says it's important, and it's important to help heal deep, profound wounds. Totally agree with you, Wheaton. The ideal is, it would be great for everyone to come together, mutual support, with love, with respect, and with an open mind, and to learn from one another. So we'll share with you what the research shows. All right, so for those of you, and there are different people in different places with this, but one of the things I want you to understand is when we do analysis, we're doing a double helix analysis. And we are trying to understand what's going on psychologically, sociologically, developmentally, and systemically before we even come to this, quote, color code. So everything I'm doing here today is at a 30,000-foot view. It's overly simplified. And like I said, we've got literally 3,000 pages of research and data and correlations between a ton of different things. It's a 95-dimensional space that we ended up with when we pulled this research out. And there are components of it that are still relevant. There are components of it that aren't. So on the one side, and I'm going to do this just a little bit differently, but on the one side, imagine we've got, with our warm colors, is individualism. And on the other side, we've got this more collectivism, right? So there's some people who are motivated because their internal engine tells them what to do. And there are other people who are motivated because their engine of where they get instructions comes from outside them. And then we've got shades of gray all throughout. So you can be dominated by a collective with a little dose of individualistic, or you can be dominated by individualism with just a dash of collectivism, or it could be, 25-75 or 60-40 or 50-50 or 40-60, right? So there are ranges of this that make this a lot more complex than what I'm about to show you. But it helps us to start to contextualize some of this information. With the individualism, we have expressiveness. I do what I want to do because the drivers in me push me to become this or change that or do the other thing. And then on the sacrificial side, I do what I do because I'm getting these instructions, and this is where I need to put my focus and attention. It's not on me, it's on more of those around me. And like I said, we've got both of those playing simultaneously. So we've got the warms, which are a theme that continues to repeat from beige to red to orange to yellow. And they all have that expressive theme. And it's I tackle the world, it's my job to change it, I'm going to make it better, I'm going to improve it, I'm going to leave things better off. I'm going to have an impact. Things can be better. I will fix it. And then the other side of it, on our cool side, our purple, our blue, our green, with the turquoise, those are all much more in the collective, communal, sacrificial, paying attention to the signs and signals outside of me. All of them do it differently, but there's a core way of doing it that makes sense of the world, that also shapes behavior and leading and relating and connecting, and sometimes the way values are held. So this is more of a, this is the way the world is. I'm going to adapt myself to it, and I'm going to chillax because this is the way the world is. So you can see that there are pros and cons for both of these. So with our, quote, blue, so remember, blue is an oversimplification. We have this absolutistic way of dealing in the world. So it's I sacrifice myself now, we get reward later. So we put in the work and we get stuff done because we know that reward is going to happen later. And that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. So here's what you guys were curious about, which is, where does all of this fit? So this is our traditional political values, political spectrum. And let me see if my pen is going to work. Let's see, will I get my pen working here? There it is. We'll work with this one. So on this side is our political left. On this side is our political right. And there's another scale here that we called complexity, right? So when we broke the data out, we did a particular mathematical treatment that enabled us to see it in terms of complexity. So some of these will be seeing in terms of colors. Some of it will be in terms of psychological complexity. So that is not for the better. That just is a part of what happens as we're tackling those different problems that Cheryl was talking about. And so as we look at our far right conservatives, we've got on the far right slightly less complexity than our moderate conservatives. But notice that our moderate conservatives and our moderate liberals are in a very similar zone of complexity. And then our liberals and those who said other, and other being just a titch above the liberals, but on the far left, we have higher complexity than the moderate liberal, and the other than the moderate conservative, and the moderate conservative a little bit more than the far right conservative. So this is the ability to handle a bunch of different conditions coming at you, different challenges coming at you, a world of contradiction, a world of chaos. So the greater the complexity, the easier it is to handle some of the chaos, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing, because it also means that our world is increasing in complexity, and that accelerates the journey to some other problems that are occurring, like climate change, like pollution, like large-scale war, like the degradation of the species on our planet, like the using up of limited resources. So all of that complexity, a lot of people like to say complexity equals good. Complexity equals problems that are so out of hand that not one single individual can even track it, that our brains can't even track what's happening. So we will, as Graves said, evolve to the limits of our biological capacities. And some of this is challenging our biological capacities to cope with. And that's why we're seeing some of that frustration. We're seeing some of that anxiety. We're seeing some of the anger, the rage, the pushing back on things, the what the heck is going on, hand wringing in the world. And so now let's look at some of the political values themselves. So for this one, the question was, public education is, and then we looked at the both left to right political spectrum at the bottom and also complexity along the side. And what was really interesting, and even though we did about 2,500, not all of them, because the way our assessment was set up, not all of them completed all aspects of it. So out of that 2,500, we had 2,148 that answered this question, that also had the pieces of data that helped us build this algorithm to map and match it. So on the right, with greater complexity, the right said this should totally be an exclusively a local matter. And then lower on the complexity chart, public education should be a function of state and local authorities. So we're narrowing as we're coming closer to the middle. It should be local. It should only be local. It should just be here because only we know what's going on. No, we're willing to give up to the state some. And then greater complexity is important to the whole national economy and requires some federal support. And then on our left is that just this wholesale, so important, the federal government should control it. Now, if I believe that the federal government is a body that understands things, that could control it better, and I'm interacting with someone else, and I'm the person who says, absolutely, this must be an exclusively local issue. The federal government, big government, gets in the way. How are we going to be able to bridge that kind of a divide when we are completely at different ideological perceptions of public education and what it means for me, what it means for my children, what it means for my children's children and the future, with a lack of trust in the government, with a belief that the government needs to contribute, and with these different layers and levels of complexity. So that's what we started finding that became super interesting in the values portion of what people were believing. Then we had this one. Let me see if I could just bring that. There we go. That should fix it. This question, the United States should pursue closer economic ties with Russia and with China. So on the far right, they're saying we strongly disagree. Heck no, no way. You see that protectionism. You see some of that suspicion of other. You see some of that, we can't trust those guys who are coming after us. So no way. And when we gathered this, that was before this current president and this current administration. So these values, these opinions change much more easily than some of the things that we're talking about in spiral dynamics with these levels of human existence. And then on the far left, we have people going, yep, totally. I strongly agree. We need to have a more international perspective. We should pursue closer ties with Russia and China, and then by implication with the rest of the world. And so you see that in terms of complexity, those polar opposites are kind of at the same range. And then as we get sort of more in the middle, I'm on the agree side and I'm on the disagree side. We've got greater complexity there than on either of our two ends, which is kind of interesting. Now, remember, it's a compilation of data. It's, not everyone who's on the far left or the far right is going to agree with that opinion, but on the whole, that's where the trend takes people. And then this one, close surveillance of radical groups is necessary to protect society as a whole. So on our right, we strongly agree. On our left, we strongly disagree. So this is where, and then of course our complexity. So this is where control and dominance, so that we can preserve our way of life, is playing out today in our political spheres, whether it's in the US, whether it's in France, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in South Africa, Australia. This is a very common thing to see, where there is us and there is them. So we've got this bipolar view of who we consider to be us, who we consider to be them. And if we see them as evil, if we have leaders who say there are those evildoers and we've got to get out there and we've got to do something about those evildoers, because if we don't do something about that, then our society is going to collapse. Those who are prone to hearing authoritarian messages of dominance and control, who are concerned about society collapsing, who have a very clear view of what is and isn't the right way of doing things, who love their children, love their communities, love their neighbors, and want to protect them, good, kind people will resort to doing things that normally they would believe would be wrong. But there's an exception, because what they're doing is they're sacrificing themselves to protect family, to protect society, to protect neighborhoods, to protect the people that they love. So we're seeing that, more of that on this side of the political spectrum. And on this side of the political spectrum, we're saying, no, we believe in open, we believe in free, we believe in fair. We believe that, those radical groups aren't really that dangerous. Maybe they've got some different ideas, but we really should listen. We really should figure it out. We really are made better by having these different approaches and different ideas. So can you see that when, we've got folks on the one side who, strongly agree that we shouldn't have close surveillance, we shouldn't live in a big brother society. And then we've got those who are willing to really have strong surveillance, how we can have some really extreme sort of push-pull tensions, and where we can get into some really pretty heavy-duty battles that are super ego involving, because we're trying to protect those we care about, those we love, our way of life, our family, our future, and the future of our children. So, am I guaranteeing that spiral dynamics is going to create peace in the world? No. And we can begin to understand why it's important to different groups and where we're coming down on different sides of particular issues. So,
Natasha,
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
If you go back to the previous slide, and I lost the thread on where does complexity fit into this? What is the meaning of that here? I guess I see the spectrums and where people fall, but
Mhm.
what does the complexity tell us in this, in people's ability to change or flex or things like that?
This is more spiral related.
Okay.
So, and I've kind of got it over here where we've got, more of our blue and more of our orange and more of our green, more of our
Oh,
yellow.
I see.
So it's not that exactly, and it's moving in that direction.
Gotcha. Okay,
Right.
I hadn't made that connection to the spiral. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and really good question, Ed, because I think I didn't make it as clear as I could have. So thanks for jumping in. That was helpful to everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm holding back on saying it that way because I don't want you to go, okay, so if I'm on the left, I'm yellow, and if I'm on the right, I'm blue, right? And so just hold your representation of colors and the different political positions a little more lightly than that.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Natasha, I'm wondering if the close surveillance thing might be different now that the right wing extremists have started getting so violent, and the left wingers are glad that the FBI's people are like rescuing Governor Gretchen Whitman from Boogaloo Boy and that kind of thing.
So there's yes, let's keep order, right? But if we were to decouple our current times from the stance, look at Mandela, right? And thinking of our sacrifice self sort of come from, I'm willing to sacrifice myself for my values. I'm willing to sacrifice myself for my beliefs, for my principles, for our way of life, for my country, right? And this ideal that Nelson Mandela had was this ideal of equality. And that ideal emerged with our Q coping, our blue world. Equality is possible. Now, how do we do it? We do it differently, and it looks a little odd if you think equality is different than, say, someone on the right versus the left. But he said it's an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it's an ideal for which I'm prepared to die, right? And in our more blue world, we are willing to die for our principles, for our ideals, for our values, for our country, for our family. So we have that on both sides, and throughout the political spectrum, the proportions are just a little different. And this is where I think in the US, we see it very profoundly. And it's shifting and it's changing, and we're seeing some massive shifts. But further on our right, homosexual acts between consenting adults in private should be legal. Strongly disagree. We're seeing that moving. It's been slow. It's been long fought. It's been a difficult win, but it's beginning to shift. And so the strongly disagree, interestingly, is slightly more complex than our disagree. And then on the left, it's like, yeah, I agree. People can do what they want to do. They can love whoever they want to love. They can marry whoever they want to marry. I don't know what's up with those other people because it's not their problem. Right? So you can see how that tension starts to happen based on how strongly we're holding beliefs and how much we want to shift another's beliefs, another's values, another's views. And in that push-pull, tension. We have, for some, these are endless struggles of good and evil. Those evil homosexual people doing those evil things. And then on the other side, it's, like, stop being so judgmental. They get to do what they want to do. Those are their standards. No, there's one type of standard, and it's God's standard. There's one type of standard, and it's the state's standard. There is one type of standard, and it is in the book of Mao. There is one standard, and it is in the book of spiral dynamics. And spiral dynamics says, right, whatever that external principle is, standard is, whether you call it God or the book or spiral dynamics or the state, is a thing that's directing us in terms of, when we're closer to this blue, in terms of what to think, how to behave, what to do. And that is why when you are a leader of a group that thinks more in this way, every word you utter is critical, because it's giving either a directive overtly or covertly as to the behaviors and the actions that you're expecting your tribe to follow. And that's why people right now are preparing for riots in the streets and chaos and problems at polling places, because some people are going to polling places armed to enforce something that they've heard their leader say should be right and should be true. And then another hot button issue, which I pulled up, which is a woman should have the right to have an abortion through the 6th month of pregnancy. And on our right, we've got the strongly disagree. And then over here on our left, we've also got a strongly agree. And notice that both are in the same area of complexity. So the predominance of the data on either side says we've got less complexity in these political groups, in these political people who are advocating these positions at these two ends. So if I totally, with all of my heart, willing to sacrifice myself to protect a woman's right to have an abortion, and then I'm on, so on the left, and I'm totally of the opposite opinion on the right, totally with my full heart, absolutely, I will die to protect that fetus. What do we think is going to happen here? We're going to have conflict. We're going to have people butting heads. We're going to have it escalate, and we're going to have ugly things happen when we absolutely hold those values and encounter one another, and know that because it is my mission in life and in the world to protect this and to convince other people that they're wrong and maybe they're evil, that gives us kind of a recipe for problems. So that's why we're seeing some of what we're seeing. So our political scale. So over here on this side is the average for this particular tool. So let's see, it follows kind of that line. So what we see in our journey, left to right or right to left, is above average with our blue, but decreasing as we move along the spectrum. It doesn't mean we have no blue on the extreme liberal. We do. It's just that a preponderance of it is more likely to be over on this side than on this side. So when we look at some of what's been happening in our country, the more we have two things. One is messages of do not negotiate and messages of negotiation being seen as weak, with the psychology of punitiveness, along with absolutism, we see an unwillingness to negotiate, to talk about things, to come to compromise, because that compromise is seen as weak. Only weak people compromise. Only weak people give a little and don't dominate the conversation. And this is where it's a no-win. And people start turning away from negotiating, and they start turning to different tactics because they know that the future of this country is rooted in what happens here and now. And both sides and all along the spectrum, people are seeing that. If we look at our view of self, so again, here's our average. On our strong Republican, we're peaking above our average. And these averages were taken from organizations, so more in the corporate space, from the bottoms of organizations to the tops of organizations in the US, in Latin America, in Europe, in South Africa. So this is more of a larger human average. These averages are political people averages. And so we see it, here, and then we've got like that step down, then we've got another step down, then we've got a step down, then a little up, and then a little down, so different proportions for, the strong Democrat, and then maybe the moderate Democrat, or the strong Republican, and then the more moderate Republican, and then the people who are saying, well, I'm an independent. So different proportions, different mix, different ingredients across the political spectrum. And then in terms of party identification, so again, here's our average. On the Republican side, we've got it higher than our average. On the Libertarian side, we've got it a lot lower than average. On our independent side, we've kind of got it between the Republican and the Libertarian. So a little bit different there. Democrats, step down. Greens, a further step down. So yes, we can have a lot of blue in those who are advocating the green position. Yes, we can have a lot of blue in those who are advocating a libertarian position or a democratic position or an independent position. It's less likely, and as a whole, the groups that are involved politically have less. And remember that the leaders of these groups, the leaders in these political parties, will tend to be either at the same level if closed, right? So that's the leadership model, at the same level if closed, or a half step ahead if open. So someone here is, if closed, is likely to have followers who have more of that, if that makes sense. So they're seeing that leader as a leader because they're that half step ahead, Graves-wise or spiral-wise. And remember that we have these flowing curves as we move into a color. And so let's say, we're talking about blue right now. Our world D matches our coping Q. It gives us blue. That is a stable area in our world, and we've got steps along the way that we are making as that shade of blue increases and that shade of blue also decreases on our exit. And I heard an unmuting, so let me stop the share real quick to see if that makes sense. And I'm trying to stay on time because there's a lot, and I could talk about this for days on end. So was there a comment, question, clarification? No, just a haphazard unmuting.
Well, for me, the fundamental point of interest is the presence or absence of belief seeming to be determining the ST scaling. That if we examine, if there's a difference between believing something.
Yeah, there's a relationship. One is not determining the other. That becomes more prevalent for those in that political group.
Well, okay, but if you're, for example, those who oppose abortion as on a belief system, that it's a belief system that they appeal to justify their objection to abortion. They're pro-life, and they make a definition of life on the basis of the point of conception through to birth, and want to have that protected, and they base that on a belief in usually with well, mostly is Christian belief system.
And so here's where that is critical. It is critical to know which group in which society and what the messages are, because that can be very different in a different group with a different leader with different norms, right? So those beliefs, it's not the beliefs. Yeah, they're part of a system of believing. They're part of a system of reinforcement. They're part of the package that is rooted in Bible and Christianity, but that's not true for all of them. So you've got to pay attention not only to the top of the iceberg, what are the beliefs that are happening? How are they being shared? Who's saying what's going on? You got to go below the iceberg to figure out what's happening environmentally, what's happening socially, what's happening in the system, what's happening by leadership, what's happening in that connective space. So this is true for the US at this phase in our world. If it was a totally different set of leaders over time, those messages, those values, those beliefs could completely unravel and be an entirely different set that are also held solidly, absolutely, with the willingness to sacrifice, with the willingness to die for that unborn, I don't know, unborn cow, right? It could change dramatically based on the messaging. And so that's why this notion of belief is a system is so difficult in the world of spiral dynamics to unravel, because you have to remember the beliefs can change. Really hard to change. And you've seen how hard some of this is to change, but it changes much more easily than these underlying systems. Lynn, did you want to jump in?
Well, I have two questions. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The first question is the y-axis, is that the count or the percentage of people who are in blue, since we're talking about blue, or is it the intensity of their blueness?
That's a really great question. And that's being kind of thrown into the blender and mixed up. And the dipping stick is going in there. And that's why I'm saying it's a trend towards, but it's not, don't equate it, right? Okay. So the measure is intensity, but it's also some degree of that. So remember, hold on to that for just a moment. Let me do the next set, and then let's come back to that if that's okay.
That's great. Great. Yes, and I'll mention, while I have the voice, I'll mention my second question. You can maybe integrate it into something. It's just, do political parties actually know this stuff and use this stuff? Do they do psychosocial metrics on their constituents and use this?
They don't really care. They're
doing it.
They are doing it naturally but they're not doing it with understanding of the approach.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
I did some work locally with one of our electeds during a campaign, and we did a poll. And it took a lot of manpower to do the poll. And I was within 5 points and predicted the winner based on the poll. And the way the results of the election were almost perfectly, not perfectly, but almost perfectly aligned with our polling. So unless you've got your finger on the pulse of, what do people believe? How are they reacting to the person, and who's coming out that day? Who makes it? Who actually votes? And whose votes are counted? Do we know, where things are going to go?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So hang tight with that, because that's actually really a good question, Lynn, because what it helps, Lynn's question helps us to frame what this data means, because it's too easy to say, okay, well, all Republicans are blue. There's a mix, and it's like soup, right? Statistics is like soup. You put in all the data, and then you start slicing and dicing it, and then you put in a little bit too much salt, and it's like, that one, that tastes a little bit more like salt, or, oh no, that one's a little bit more oregano. There's a bunch of a mix in there, but then something starts to rise. It doesn't mean that's purely in there. It means that that's the preponderance. So if we take our multiplistic view that we covered, this is the express self, as Graves said, calculatedly, so I don't piss off other important people. So this is, we see it some in the politics of pragmatism. In here, we maintain control and dominance, but the reasons are different. So control and dominance can look very similar on the surface, but underneath it, we're doing it for different reasons. We're doing this to make things better. We're doing things to make things grow. We're doing this for a better future. We're doing this for our own interests. So that's where you get a lot of these different interest groups trying to push forward their interests, trying to manipulate, trying to dominate, because this one says, I do what I want to do, and I shape the future, and I make it better, and I make it better for, this group that I see and understand. And that can be Republican, and that can be Democrat. That can be corporate, or that can be anti-corporate, right? So it's, where are we coming from with this? So this scale is a little bit different. On this side, moving towards here, we're in our warm colors. We're in our expressive colors. On this scale, and I transferred it, and it takes a while to update it, because it was from an old version of PowerPoint to a newer one. So the colors aren't exactly what they were when I started. So please forgive me. This was supposed to be kind of shaded a little bit more. Here, let's do a different color. Ink color. This was supposed to be shaded a little bit more in our blue. This was supposed to be shaded up here in a little bit more orange. But over here, we've got our sacrificial. So in here, to Lynn's question, what are we blending? We are blending more of our red. We are blending, and there's there's not a lot of it in politics. You've got to, even though it might look to you like there's a lot, there really isn't. But we just took the scores of red, we took the scores of orange, we took the scores of yellow, and blended that together in this more expressive zone. And on this side, we took the scores of purple, and there really isn't very much. We took the scores of blue, and we took the scores of green. And we used our more reliable, stronger tool to do that with. And so in here in the middle, you've got mushes and mixes to some degree. So Lynn, hopefully that's answering your question. So on our far right, so we've got far right again, and we've got far left. And in this one, we did a different thing. We altered the scale because what I wanted to do was see where more of our third parties were going to fall. So in here, we've got a neither one nor the other, right? And in here, this is where we had the Greens. This is where we had the Libertarians. This is where we had our decline to state or other, for those who are like, I'm not going to be part of any party. So we had that option for those who don't identify on either side along the usual spectrum to self-identify differently. So we're adjusting their validated tool to be able to do this. And what we saw was on the far right, we had much more of that sacrificial. Makes sense, right? I'm going to sacrifice self for country, for ideology, for my president, for my religious group, for my community. And then on this side, probably because it was very much dominated by libertarians, we had a very high level of expressiveness, right in that I don't identify with any of them. We had a lot of libertarians take this. They were absolutely outstanding in their willingness to participate. And then as we move towards, far further liberal, it's kind of more in that kind of mixed zone. A little bit of this and a little bit of this, and yeah, we're kind of mixed there. And then moderate conservative, same, right? Yeah, we're kind of mixed there. We're a little bit of going towards that expressive, but we still have some of that sacrificial. So a little bit different, I think, than a lot of people think, where they want to go, this is the color and now I've got it. That's not the way the system works. It's much more nuanced. And I hope you're taking that away from this. And then if we take that issue again, homosexual acts between consenting adults in private should be legal, right? Well, where do we fall in terms of expressive and sacrificial in terms of Republican, or shall I say right, and in terms of left? Well, if I am expressive, absolutely. People should do whatever the heck they want to do. Don't tell me what to do because, yeah, don't get into my bedroom. Government, stay out of it. Don't tell me what to do. So you get to see some really interesting contradictions in the data and some of the messaging that happens publicly. And so I disagree, and I am more on the sacrificial. Strongly disagree is a bit more of that mix between our sacrificial and expressive. So in here, I'm willing to shape and change others in view of the ideology that I have, right? So we've got a mix. I'm going to shape and change while following my leaders, while following my beliefs, while following messages from other. So we're working for improvement in here. We're working for betterment of others. And these beliefs with a dose of expressiveness causes folks to be willing to shape and change others. And so kind of a little different from what you might have been thinking. At least that was different from what I thought would come back from the data. And, what are we doing? We're looking for the best solutions. We're looking for possibilities. And if I am more here, much more expressive, well, let's share. Everybody should get freedom. Everybody should be able to do what they want to do. Everybody's got a right to determine their own path, their own way of doing stuff. Prayer in public schools should be allowed, right? Again, from our expressive to sacrificial. Heck no, don't tell me what to do. Absolutely. And I'm going to pull my children out of public school, and I'm going to put them in homeschooling, because I'm going to teach them the right way to do things, because the world out there is too damn sinful and it's just going to hell in a handbasket real fast. And I want them to have this strong guiding moral compass. And over here, they're like, everyone gets to think on their own. If they don't want to pray, it's good, it's fine. So that whole, sort of our journey from expressive to sacrificial is a massive journey in change of identity and in change of how I approach things, and shifting in the way an individual will work with others and their beliefs. So Wheaton said, understanding of the different level of spiral dynamics, quote, levels or systems and the viewpoints. Why are we so bitterly divided, each with our own facts and truths? And is there a path to unity? And so I think what we're starting to see is why we're so bitterly divided. We're bitterly divided not only about what it is we're believing, but how it is we are holding those beliefs. So it is critical for the rollout of things to be done thoughtfully, because, as we've heard in previous elections, words have consequences. And is there a path to unity? In the diversity of human beings doing human things, that is what's growing our ability to consider and contemplate and think about complexity. Because without different human beings having different views and different values and different beliefs and different opinions and different developmental levels and expressing those different developmental levels in different ways, we wouldn't have complexity. So are there ways to ease it? Absolutely. We do some of that in Coach's Essential Toolkit, where we're having skill building around how do we connect more deeply and profoundly so we know what another's truth and reality is. So we don't fall into, what I like to call invisible holes. And those invisible holes are the invisible holes of those beliefs and values. And at the same time, when I hold my beliefs and values super strongly, and I say abortion is wrong, and we have to execute radicals, and you're a leader who comes into my space and you say, I believe abortion is wrong, whether or not you do believe it, and I believe we need to execute the radicals, I'm likely to vote for you. And then when you go off and do something like compromise and you don't execute the radicals and you allow abortion, or you don't put a justice on the Supreme Court who is anti-abortion, then I feel betrayed. Then I feel like you're a bad leader. And then I may very well decide to fix and right things and throw myself on the sword of eliminating a bad leader. So I hope that's useful. And then, so Ron was understand spiral dynamics. So the assessments that we use to get the viewpoints of the right, of the left, and the middle, I think we're doing some of that. And Ron, I loved what you posted, and I'm using that in just a minute. So let's look at it. So this question, the US should eliminate almost all barriers to foreign trade, right? Oh, that's kind of a sort of contradictory thing to what we saw earlier about, Russia and China, right? And so here we go. On the right, we strongly agree, but what have we been doing over the last 4 years? And then over here, much more expressive. So we've got a divide on the right between those who strongly agree, but they see it for one reason, more sacrificial. And then for those who are agreeing and they think they're holding the same values, right? They think they believe the same things, but then in the execution of it and what it means to them, it'll be playing out in an entirely different way. And when we were doing this, we saw some interesting divides that showed us what was emerging as divides in the Republican Party. So that got super interesting. And then we are seeing some of that middle stuff sort of, kind of in the middle of expressive and sacrificial, a little more on our left. And so the means, so what that means over here, much more risk-taking, more strategic, more calculating the odds, more willing to, get that autonomy. And over here, much more protect our world, protect our country, protect our communities. The belief being that if we've got trade coming back and forth, that's good for everyone. And we've seen some of the shutting down of this sort of internationalism over the last 4 years. And what some of the consequences of that are. There's a layer and a level of protectionism here. There's a layer and level of not being able to cope with some of the shifts that internationalism has brought. And that's where we see shifts in opinions. Opinions and beliefs can shift much more easily than the systems that we're talking about. All right. Government should provide health insurance to relieve the private sector of that responsibility. Absolutely not. We need to leave this in private hands, says those who are on the expressive side. Absolutely true. We all need to take care of one another. We say on our sacrificial side on the left, right? We need to take care of the people. We need to let the free market rule. Free market rules because I don't want you to tell me what to do. Sacrificial, yes, government should because I trust government. So some of that does have to do exactly, Susanna, with what you were saying. How much do I trust this government right here, right now? How much do I trust the private sector right here, right now? And then, over here, well, yeah, kind of true, but last resort, sort of in the middle of that expressive and sacrificial zone. And so that tells us we've got mixed systems in play. And this one, Ron, thank you very much. What's happening economically? Who is hurting economically, right? And this shows us, and I love this, Ron, thanks for grabbing this and popping it into the Facebook group. It shows us that the different economies, that people literally can be neighbors and be living in different worlds. Neighbors in the same neighborhood could be living in different worlds. Neighborhoods within the same city can be living in different economies and in different worlds. And unless you are living their world, having their problems, for a lot of folks who lack empathy, they're judging everything based on their own experience of the economy, based on their own family, based on their own friends and their experiences that they talk about. And now, in some ways, we're more separated than ever because social media is feeding us exactly what we're looking at all the time. So we're more inclined to be in bubbles. And in these bubbles, we have less understanding of those who are very different, who are having different experiences. So that cross-pollination is decreasing as we're going along. And with it, decreasing understanding, decreasing empathy, decreasing concern, and decreasing awareness. So for this one, the best place to find political leadership is within the business community. And on our far right, we say, yeah, absolutely true. Business leaders make the best politicians. And we know if you have financial savvy, you'll be able to run a country. And then on this side, for different reasons, we're saying in general, not always, general true, but not always. And then on this side, on the sacrificial side, false. No. Government that's trained to do governmental things, they're much better. And I want to protect our way of life and keep the corporates out of it. And which is interesting because I think one of the stats is about 87, if I remember correctly, and if it hadn't changed, 87% of the population has a suspicion of business and large corporates. And so it's kind of interesting to see the skew that we're getting in the political groups here. So in terms of political scale, now this was super interesting. Here's our average. So right here, our little number 8 is our average on this particular tool. And notice, on the far left, much lower on our orange, and on the far right, under average. And then just right here in the middle, kind of like this little peak, and then it starts to drop. But what this says to me is that our political class is really not as aware of this particular system as we believe they should be and as they need to be in order to understand the manipulations of all the special interests. And so I found this one particularly interesting. And then over here, the view of self, again, average, right? We'd be expecting way above average somewhere, right? Where is that way above average? Well, the way above average here isn't getting in the politics, which is interesting. So, smaller on this end, a little less here, a little bit more there, but still all of it from left to right, right to left, average or below, which I found fascinating. And party identification, again, here's our average, right? Less than average for Republicans, less than average for libertarians, independents, still less than average. For the Dems, a lot less than average than, say, the Republicans, and for Greens, lowest on that scale. And if we go to our green, interpersonalistic, which is deny self, so self and others can obtain now. And then we move into when jobs are scarce, government should allow free market mechanisms to bring about a natural economic recovery, right? That's what we're getting from our more expressive. But over here, on our more sacrificial, we need to increase government spending for social welfare programs, right? This is just slightly left. This is our further left, where they say provide jobs through massive public works program, change things, make it better, improve the situation, work on it. You know, big government, that's your job, do that. No, no, no. On this side, I know we both are expressive, but we believe different things. You believe government should do it. We believe corporates should do it. Just let free markets work. They will make their magic happen. And over here, it's, yeah, go ahead, provide incentives for business, right? You see that difference between where we're going with our expressive and where we're going with our sacrificial. When we combine our expressive scores and when we combine our sacrificial scores, we get some clear markers on the policies that people want. And we're starting to get something of the motive as to why they want those policies. This one, employers should emphasize hiring of minorities and women to correct for past discrimination. This goes to diversity, right? So on the expressive side, on the right side, no, let them lift themselves up by their bootstraps. They can do it, let them figure it out. I had to do it on my own. You know, on our far left, absolutely, totally agree. This is, you know, part of our social responsibility to bring everyone up together. We need to care for those who have had discrimination. We need to care for those who have been unjustly treated in the past. We need to rectify the system that's caused that to happen, because we can't let that continue happening. And then we get disagree here. It's in our sort of more sacrificial zone, just slightly on that side of the spectrum on the right. And then, you know, we get the agree, again, more sacrificial here than say over here. And, you know, this one you go, well, why do you disagree? You know, well, we need to maintain status quo. We need to maintain structure. And yes, we are moving into a world of lifting ourselves up by our bootstraps, making a difference, working towards improving things. And so on this side, we're working on collaboration. We're working on collective decision making. We're looking at, you know, more affinity of community and spirit and inclusion. Let's set aside all those things that divide us. And over here, it's heck, let those crazies go do their thing. We are making it, and we need to make sure we keep making it. And so notice the different drivers of valuing. So over here on our green, and the green's a little bit of a messy score, and we cover that in our certification. But here's our average, right? And also, please note that we saw distinctly different scoring patterns across most of these between men and women. So this is a collapse of men and women, and everyone who said they were a strong Republican, everyone who put themselves as independent, everyone who said, well, maybe moderate Republican or stronger than moderate, right? So we grouped them and then reran the data to see how strong this score and scale was. And what we found was that those who were really pushing back on some of these more collective, collaborative, sort of more big government sorts of things had, you know, half of the score and significantly less than average. And then it starts kind of climbing once we get into the Democratic side, right? So here, the strong Democrat is typically where Greens would have placed themselves. Let's do a few more. Let me finish before we're let me finish on time. But again, you see the same thing, party identification. So then we did it, which party do you most identify with? And those who said Republican, below average, libertarians, significantly below the Republicans, independents, much closer to average, and significantly more for our Greens and our Democrats. And I think, this is just the same thing for the same, it's just a slightly different imagery for the same one that we just saw. But with this zone, we're saying we need to negotiate. We need to give a little bit. We need to sacrifice some. Those with more need to give a little bit. And we're not punitive. And we do want to negotiate. And we do want to get more voices to the table, because we know that the greater diversity there is, the more solutions there will be, and the more brain power there will be. And then we see that just very steady going up from right to left. And then our yellow, very quickly, much more relativistic. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to hurt others in the process of it. With this scoring, it's more of a valuing of competence, functionality. It's got to be useful. Skillful people, the competent people have to be able to do things. I want to know how things connect and how they work and where things go. And it's not exactly the same meaning as Graves gave it, but we get to see over here that all of these political people are slightly to significantly above our average. So what that means, a few different things. They're looking at competence. They're looking at finding ways to shine for their contributions. They want to make a difference. They're concerned about things. They're concerned about making a positive impact. They want things to work. They may come at it very differently, but there is a desire to see a positive change made. Are they all relativistic? No. And we've got some corrections in the tool for that we train on when we do certification. So just be cautious of these scores. The yellow does not mean they think in T ways and they cope in T ways. But on the Republican side, much more closer to that average. In the independent sort of middle zone, higher than average here, higher than average. Then we see a little dip on the not so strong Democrat. And then we also see, kind of very similar between, slightly left of center, slightly right of center. And let's do this. Party identification. Those who identify as Republicans, much closer to our average. Those who are libertarians, much further away from it. Those who are Greens, further away from it. Dems take a little bit of a dip, and independents. So, we've got a little bit more of commonality between our Dems and our independents. So politics, the question that we ask, and why do we have divisiveness? The question that we have to ask is the question that we spent the weekend tackling. So all politics is rooted in this question, which is how should who resource whom to do what? Are we resourcing schools, or are we resourcing corporates? Are we resourcing pro-life organizations, or are we resourcing Planned Parenthood? Who is getting the resources? Who is getting those resources cut? And all of that is rooted in the political question. So many people say, well, politics, that means, something ugly. Politics is what we do as a society in saying, this is where I want our limited resources to go. These are the groups, these are the policies, these are the institutions, this is the direction I believe, and a collective believes, is more important than maybe something else. This is where we're giving our elected officials a mandate in which to carry out our will. And so it's important that we know where they stand. It's important that we know who they are informed by. It's important that we know who has access to them. And are we going to end divisiveness forever? I'm going to let you answer that, but I'm going to do your biggest takeaways, and we've got like 2 minutes. So if you guys would pop those into the Facebook chat, would love to see it. Does this inform any of what we covered over the weekend? Does it inform your view of Spiral? Does it help you understand where we are politically and what all of the tension and the stressors are about? And so if you can answer those questions and then just give me a, well, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up, but you could give me a thumbs down if you'd like. I talked fast and that was just a teeny tiny slice of the data. And we can carry the discussion on in the Facebook group. All right, helpful? Worked, interesting? Did that help unpack a few things? I'm seeing some nodding. Thank you, Cheryl. Hope that got your question. Confusing? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's that understanding. That's why I keep saying we have to put together not only what's at the surface, the values and the beliefs and the memes and the opinions. That's critical, but also understand how it's being held. And one of the ways it's being held is super expressively. And one of the ways it's being held is super sacrificially. And one of the other ways it's being held is pretty expressively with a little sacrificially. And another way it's being held is kind of a mixture of sacrificial and expressive as we're journeying and oscillating between the two. And another way it's being held is more sacrificially with a little bit of expressively. So I know, confusing, but it's not hard, fast, simple, easy. And this took us 3 years to go through. It took thousands of hours to unpack and match up and understand with one of our brilliant statisticians. And if you get to the other side of the complexity, as the great quote, he's slipping my mind right now, as the great quote from one of our justices is, I don't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give anything for the simplicity on the far side of complexity. Complexity is a messy, confusing thing to go through, but it is worth it because on the other side of it, it starts to come together in an elegant way. And on the other side of that is a new complexity. So, hope you had fun. I'm gonna dial out now because I've got another call. We squeezed this in for you because we promised we would. Hope you had fun with it, and we'll post it up there for you as well. All right, guys, have a good one. If you want to grab the chat, do so now. And I am closing it out. All right, take care.